on Archives Live. I'm your host tonight, Libby Whitlow, and joining us in the browsing room of the Edmund Lowe Library is David Peters, head of the OSU Archives. We hope you all at home have enjoyed a restful and happy holiday season, and we are excited to see everyone into 2022. For our first live stream of the year, we're going to talk about the history of music on Oklahoma State's campus and how it has shaped campus culture. As we begin our conversation today, please feel free to type into the chat any songs you remember from your time at OSU, or tell us how music shaped your years here on campus. Did you ever attend an Orange Peel event, or a dance event, or noon concert series? If you have a question for David about the history of music, don't be afraid to leave a comment that we can get on to the show today as well. With that, David, let's start looking into OSU's past. There have been a multitude of choirs on campus. How have they been able to incorporate diverse musicians into their groups or into OSU?
So, when OSU starts, OAMC, most of the music is student performed. I mean, students who are interested in singing gather around a guitar and someone who can play, and they sing. And so it starts very informally. It's really not until about 1900 that we begin to get faculty here who actually aren't music faculty, but are willing to teach like vocal music or piano. And at that point, we begin to have our first small bands, the first band, but it was all male. You couldn't be a female to be a part of the band. But it slowly grew until I think it was about 1908. We get our first faculty member here, who we still don't have music as a major or a minor, but you could take these piano classes or vocal music classes. And some of these first musicians who were acting as teachers were trained in some of the conservatories of Europe. So they're quite expertise. They had quite a bit of expertise, and but it wasn't an academic program at all. But students who were interested in music still gathered to sing. They performed, many recitals and concerts, just really as on a volunteer basis. It's not really until about 1915 or so when a guy named Bo Makovsky is brought to campus. So the earlier fellows who'd come here had this formal training in Europe. Bo had no formal training whatsoever. He'd been born in Bohemia, had come here as a young man, and it just was a working musician. He learned how to play various instruments, but he was the first one to bring in kind of an organized structure for band, and he's the one who leads into creating an actual music department on campus with academic classes. But Bo works with a military band. They performed during drill exercises for the military, and so that's another exposure to music. Oftentimes with dances. There would be an accompanying pianist who would play. So there is a variety of music, and Bo, there was the military band, but also that was the first time where women were invited into the orchestra, and so women could also participate formally in that. So it just develops over time, and students really are creating the incentive for this to happen. So there's far more to it than that, but we'll just kind of stop there.
Yeah, and you mentioned, early student-driven organizations on campus, Sigma Serenaders just being one example of the early student groups that brought music to Stillwater's campus. Can you tell us more about the purpose of this group and what they would do in the club, and what kind of characteristics did you have to be part of the Sigma Serenaders?
So the first literary society on campus was the Omega Literary Society, and it was all male. Well, there were several women who objected to that and went to the faculty and appealed for a second literary society. It was called the Sigma Literary Society. And that was inclusive of everyone, men and women. They were usually some of the top-notch students, but within the Sigma Society, they encouraged not just literature, but music and other cultural activities. And they formed a group called the Sigma Serenaders. And so they would perform in the auditorium of Old Central once it was completed. They performed in town, at churches and other auditoriums. In fact, they raised money at one of their concerts to purchase an organ that was the first musical instrument that was housed in the auditorium of Old Central. So it was a diverse group of men and women, and they had, usually when they traveled, they just had string accompaniment like a guitar. But when they performed like in churches or at Old Central at the auditorium, they did have the organ and keyboard. But it was a remarkable group of young people, and they provided entertainment for not only the community, but the college together. So.
Yeah. Over time, it appears that musical groups found places on campus to call home. Tell us about the buildings that have housed the arts on campus in the past.
So I mentioned the Auditorium of Old Central was the first home for most musical activity. Then the auditorium, the college auditorium, was built in about 1910, 1911. And it had a balcony all the way around, kind of a U-shaped balcony, horseshoe-shaped, held over 1,200 people, and that's where performances were held. And that's where the Saratine Center was built over the old auditorium. And so the Saratine Center, the main auditorium, is really just a different configuration of that original auditorium. But then that became a home for not only performance, but also with the expansion of the Saratine Center, offices for the music department. And then there's a little theater too, where more, well, music performance could be held there, but also for theater performances. The music department itself, once it was developed in 1921-22 as an academic institution, it was housed in what was the old engineering building, which was built in 1902. But they were housed there until they were moved over to Crutchfield Hall, which is where the Advanced Technology Research Center is now. But there was a residence hall for men called Crutchfield, and the music department then got shifted over there. And then when Saratine was completed in the early 70s, they moved there. But it was still rather crowded. They had practice facilities in the old library that was built in the 20s. They really still had to kind of find spaces where they could. The McKnight Center, of course, is the new remarkable performing arts center. And of course then Michael and Ann Greenwood, the music school now is named for them, and that's the building right next to the McKnight Center. And now they have, they'll have wonderful practice facilities and offices for the music department. So those are kind of the main locations, but it's all in that southeast corner of campus is where most of those things have taken place.
Yeah. If you're just now joining us on the live stream here, I'm with David Peters discussing how music has shaped the culture of OSU. If you have any questions, please place them in the comments section, and David will try to answer them on our show today. OSU has not only incorporated music into its campus life, but it has served to benefit the state of Oklahoma in supporting the arts. An example of this would be the OSU Band Clinic. What are the origins of the OSU Band Clinic, and what ways did it find success?
So before the Band Clinic was started, I think it was started in 1933, but before that, Bo Makovsky would take his bands and the orchestra on train tours beginning in the late teens and in the 1920s. And so they would travel around the state by train and give performances, sometimes right off of the back of the train cars. But that really exposed a lot of communities to music. But then Bo also took his marching band to like the Thanksgiving Day parade in Oklahoma City. If there was a parade or celebration in Oklahoma City or Tulsa, he would take the band. He would always include the band in like started having homecoming parades. And the band was building quite a reputation around the state. In 1933, they began inviting teachers and students, high school students, sometimes junior high students, from around the state to come to a clinic held here on campus. And by the 50s and 60s, there would be hundreds, if not thousands of people arriving on campus for this clinic. It lasted until about 68, about 35 years. These band clinics were held, and they were very popular. And from 1933 to 68 really was the development of a lot of music programs in high schools and junior highs across the state, and much of that can be traced back to Bo Makovsky and the OSU Music Department's efforts to encourage and help and assist teachers and musicians from around the state. So that's kind of the background to that. But initially he had tried to move people from here out around the state, and then at a certain point he began inviting people as our facilities improved to come to visit Stillwater. And it also attracted students to Stillwater. Many of these students that came to go to school here. So
Yeah. If any of you watching at home were able to see any of these performances or took place in the clinic, please let us know in the comments below. We would love to know where you may have seen them or what kind of instrument you played, and how OSU may have helped you in your musical career. Have there been other programs at OSU comparable to the band clinic?
So beginning in the 40s, there was usually happened around Thanksgiving, a Thanksgiving chorale. It was a vocal music activity, and it lasted for 45 years, in which people were brought to campus for vocal music productions and training and teacher interaction. So that would be the kind of the vocal music part of complement to the band gatherings. But then we've had other, we had madrigal activities that were begun in the 70s. It lasted till 2000, early 2000s. Now that doesn't really bring a lot of students and teachers in, but it was a public event, and people from across the state would come to Stillwater to attend madrigal dinners. We'd have the Messiah, still performed on campus, would bring people into Stillwater to hear the Messiah. So a variety of things over the years.
Yeah. William from the audience would like to know, do you have a favorite music performance that you've seen on campus?
Well, thank you, William, for that question. I, especially when I was I think being my senior year in high school and then in college, I used to love to attend the Messiah. It was just very rewarding to be a part of the audience, and it was a wonderful production, and I still enjoy listening to the Messiah. So that's probably my favorite single event.
And Bonnie would like to know, have you ever seen musicians use the archives?
That's a good question. We have some sheet music. In fact, we have quite a bit of sheet music. And I think we may have had a few occasions where musicians have asked to borrow some of that sheet music, or at least make copies of some of that sheet music. We've also had some musicians listen to another collection we have. We can talk more about it later, but the Oklahoma Fiddlers is a collection of fiddler recordings. And we've had some people come in and listen to those too. So there have been occasions where artists and musicians have come in to use some of the resources that we have.
Yeah. Tell me about the kinds of music collections that are available to listen to in the library.
So I mentioned
archives.
In the archives. So I mentioned the fiddlers. Now they're not available like online, but if people come in, we can pull those audio clips. We have them digitized, and they can listen to these fiddling artists from and these are some of the original artists from the teens, 20s, and 30s. They were recorded in the 60s, early 70s. So it's quite a remarkable collection. We have much of Bo Makovsky and the music department's early sheet music, so it's available for people to use. We have recordings of some of the band, especially the marching band, and they're usually at halftime events, but other occasions where they performed. We have recordings of our school songs that have been done by the various choirs and bands through the years. In fact, if you're calling like the Alumni Association or other departments on campus, oftentimes when you're on hold, you're hearing recordings of Ride 'Em Cowboy and the Alma Mater. Well, those are recordings from us. We have those recordings that have been digitized. So we do have kind of a variety of material, sheet music, and then some recordings that people enjoy utilizing.
Yeah, OSU does have a great variety of music, and it appears we also have great music specialties at OSU. Can you tell us about perhaps the jazz program here or any other specialties unique to OSU?
So I mentioned earlier, I don't know if I talked about the Allied Arts program or not, but Allied Arts was a program that brought in and still brings in a number of kind of diverse musicians. And in the 50s, and especially 40s, 50s, and 60s, they brought in a number of artists. In the 40s and 50s, a lot of big band performers. And so there were local then groups, student groups, the Varsitonians, Jim Baker and his orchestra. There was a Sam Robertson, I think, in his orchestra. But these were local kind of big bands. And so there's been a lot of jazz influence, especially from that period. So more recently now, they've been really expanding the jazz opportunities for performance and musicians, and they perform in recitals and concerts. and even the noon concert series right here in this room at noon in the Edmond Lowe Library. We have the noon concert series, and so and you can hear many of the brass and other jazz aficionados from student performances.
We've had plenty of music come out of the Edmond Lowe Library. We were talking earlier about Carl Arndt playing the carillon up in the bell tower, which I think before it was digitized was so special to have somebody on staff go and play the carillon.
And we've had a number of other, we've trained both instrumental and vocal musicians. Sarah Coburn, I think is going to be returning to Stillwater, but she got her undergraduate degree here, and she's a soprano, has a beautiful voice, but she started here with her undergraduate degree in the music department. So, we've trained a lot of students who have gone on to the Eastern conservatories and now are performing across the country.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for joining us. If you've just tuned in, I'm with the head of archives, David Peters, discussing how music has shaped the culture of OSU. Feel free to leave questions or comments in the comment section to keep the conversation going. When OAMC was renamed to OSU, there was a writing contest to find a new hymn for the university. Can you tell us about the requirements for this contest?
So they decided they needed a new alma mater. This is 1957. I think it was in the fall of 57. So there were no requirements. I mean, anybody could submit an entry for the alma mater, and they received over 90 entries. So then a group of alumni, students, and faculty was formed. It was a fairly small group, committee, who narrowed it down to, they thought, the three best choices. And what they did then is they put those three choices to music. They had the I think, symphonic orchestra provide the music, and the words were sung by the choir. And so you could actually check out a tape of those three options. And so a number of people checked those tapes out and would play them for their various organizations around town and on campus. And then they voted for which they thought was the best of the three. And so that's how it happened. It was a competition with over 90 entries, narrowed down to three, and then the top one was selected. I think it was December of 57. And the first time it was performed was at a basketball game.
Yeah. What made the alma mater hymn the winner? Can you tell us about the hymn's author as well?
So the author was Robert McCullough. Robert was a former student from OSU, OAMC at the time when he graduated. He came in the early 40s, then left to serve in World War II, and then returned to finish his degree. I think he finished in the late 40s. But then stayed in Stillwater and worked at OSU in the public information office. And so his major in college had been journalism with a music minor. So he's on staff. He's an alum, and he submits his entry, Proud and Immortal. And I think what was special about it, it was pure and simple. I mean, it really captured the essence of what I think an alma mater should say, and he did it with a few words in a remarkable way, and the music to it just blended very well with the music. So I think it was just a remarkable instance where everything kind of fell into place, and his was selected. The choices were alma mater X, alma mater Y, and alma mater Z, and he was alma mater Y. Which one? So.
Wow. We have a lot of great music here at OSU, and we recently acquired the original Ride 'em Cowboys sheet music. Where was this found, and who wrote it?
So I think it's kind of an interesting story. So a high school classmate of mine named Barbara lived, our families both lived on the north side of Stillwater, but she bid on a box of music at an estate auction at the home of John K. Long. And so John Long had passed away in 67, but his wife, Mary Dale Long, taught at Will Rogers Elementary School. She didn't pass away until 2001. So the sale must have been about 20 or so years ago, maybe 25 years ago. But Barbara bid on this box of music from the Longs, and she won. And apparently she took it with her to Missouri, It went down to her basement, and then recently, within the last 6-9 months, she described it as a cleaning frenzy. Found the box, and then contacted Matt Upson, who's one of our associate deans here, who's part of the family, wondering if we would want the box, and we said we certainly would. And so Barbara gave it to Matt, and Matt gave it to me, and so we processed the box, and it included the first handwritten draft of Ride 'Em Cowboy by John Kenneth Long, in 1934. And so we have both the original piece of music that he wrote with the words, and then we have several. It was printed at several different times. I think the first copy was 25 cents to purchase a copy, but we have several of the print editions. But we do have the original handwritten composition from John K. Long on Ride 'Em Cowboys.
So exciting. And for our audience at home, can you kind of like describe how we preserve music in the archives and preserve paper and make sure that this stays in pristine condition for someone who may not know how it's done?
So initially we took all of the items in the box and transferred them to acid-free folders, and then we label those folders. The piece of music, the original handwritten music, we will probably put that into a Mylar sleeve at some point to protect it even further. It's fairly fragile. It had two folds, but it folded in thirds, and so we'll preserve that probably in a Mylar case. But then the materials are then, after putting in acid-free folders, are put in acid-free boxes, and we create inventories for those, and then they're available for others to look at. So.
Yeah. And when people come in, do you normally have people looking at these papers with gloves or with their regular hands? I know that can be kind of a question of whether or not to do.
So they found actually that just clean hands are better for some of these fragile materials. Sometimes when you wear gloves, people actually can tear or have trouble, picking up the page. And so they've really found with paper like this, just good, clean, dry hands are best to handle it. If there's a question about the fragility of the item, then we will actually turn the page for them. And so we'll present it to them, and then we can turn the page, and they can look at the next page. So we can assist them if the materials are very fragile. But we are happy to provide access to them. And then some materials we also make digital versions of them, and so they can see a digital surrogate of it to work with. And if they want to see the original, we can pull it out. But if they're working with it on a regular basis, they can just have a copy of the digital version.
Yeah. Well, I know that is an exciting new addition to the archives. I was very excited to have it on the show today. Thank you, David, for joining me today on Archives Live and being willing to explore this topic with me and our audience at home. I hope we all get a better sense of how music has made an impact on OSU. Thank you to you, our viewers, for joining us and commenting or asking questions. Don't forget to check out all of the archives videos on OState TV and YouTube. The website will be listed at the end of this program. Thanks again, everyone, for watching. We'll see you next time on Archives Live.